Hello, everyone. Welcome to Cave of the Cross Apologetics. I'm Patrick.
I'm Tony.
And welcome to episode number 100. You made it. We made it. We all made it together.
All right.
Yes. So arbitrary number 100. We're not going to do anything different. We're going to continue to go through our book, Truth in the Culture of Doubt.
Yeah.
And we're kind of responding to Bart Ehrman, who we covered in the prelude and the introduction, why he's important, why he should be respected, why should he be taken seriously, which we acknowledge that he is a scholar and his views are well thought out. They're well written.
And he's very popular.
Yeah, very
and
popular.
He's been on TV and he's,
Right.
he's written, best-selling books. And
Yeah. So this isn't an Alex Jones or, a David Icke of the Lizard People. This is, someone who's taken scholarship seriously, comes from a long line of good pedigree from the evangelical school and then became a skeptic. And so our authors are doing is kind of covering his books in this book and responding to them. And so the chapter for this one is God immoral because he allows suffering? And so they're covering a book that he's not as well known for, I don't think, but still a need to respond to some of his claims, some of his objections, and so that's what we're going to go through with our author's help this time.
Yeah, he's so this book I think is called God's Problem that Ehrman has written, and so he thinks God has a problem.
Right. And so we'll see some of the issues with not just his arguments, but also kind of where he's coming from, because Bart Ehrman is a textual critic scholar, and so he kind of avails himself in that as his profession, but when he dips into theology, that seems kind of an odd choice for him to take. Yeah. And so we start out here by acknowledging what kind of the four claims are that we're going to be covering, that we're going to focus on, and they're the ones that Bart Ehrman tends to kind of put forth within his book, and talks about kind of why evil and suffering doesn't quite make sense in the Christian worldview.
Yeah, and so again, the way this book is laid out is really helpful, right? Mm-hmm. So the chapters start off with the various claims that they want to address,
right?
And then that's what they do throughout the chapter. They kind of answer these issues, right?
Yeah, and then there's discussion questions at the end, which are helpful if you're like, okay, what did I just get done reading?
Yeah,
well, it kind of hits the points again.
Yeah.
And so the claims that are addressed here are fourfold, and for this episode, we're probably going to cover two of them, and then our next episode will cover the latter half. So the first contradiction supposedly is God immoral because he allows suffering? Well, it's a contradiction to say that God is sovereign and God is good in view of all the evil in the world. Well, that seems like a contradiction. Mm-hmm. There's evil, but God is good. Contradiction.
So how can you have that?
Right.
Yeah.
The second one is the Bible contains many different answers to the problem of why there is suffering, why is there evil in the world, and many of these answers contradict one another. Right. That's the claim. Yeah. Third, the Bible's explanations for suffering and evil are not satisfying. Right. I don't like those.
That's right.
And fourth, the God of the Bible is immoral, therefore he cannot exist.
Yeah.
Big claims.
Yeah. And so they kind of the introduction here to this chapter, they start off by giving us what they call Bart Ehrman's problem, right? So remember most of the stuff that they're dealing with comes from his book, Ehrman's book, God's Problem. So they start off with Bart Ehrman's problem, right? And they say that Bart Ehrman is an expert in the study of ancient biblical manuscripts, right? I mean, that's his forte, that's his expertise, and that sort of thing. And it's commendable that Ehrman interacts so much with the biblical material. He takes the Bible seriously. He just doesn't believe most of what it says.
Sure, right.
So yes, he studies the Bible, he interacts with it, but he takes it seriously, but he just doesn't believe it. Right.
And so here's the point that they say. They say that should not be overlooked, though. Right. Ehrman doesn't believe in God, but yet Ehrman has morals. He's saying, there's evil, there's suffering in the world. Why is that be? That shouldn't be the case if we see for God. Yeah. And so he attacks it, but he says certain things that point to kind of a moral standard, a moral claim. Consider what he advocates people should do in light of evil and suffering. he says that, but we should also work hard to make our world the most pleasing place it can be for others. What we have in the here and now is all that there is.
All right. So we should work to make the world the best it can be for other people.
Right.
Wow.
And
that's commendable.
Right.
That's commendable.
Well, and here's the problem though, is that it's not Bart Ehrman can't have these opinions, right? He can't just have these same type of internal monologues that everyone else has. The problem is he's not a philosopher. He's not a theologian. So why is he waxing poetically when it comes to this? When he's a
well,
technical critic?
quite frankly, everybody's a philosopher, but there are some that are better than others.
Okay, Animal Farm of philosophy.
So according to Ehrman, we should help others. Wow, what a commendable thing, right? So who wouldn't want these? Our authors tells us who wouldn't want to argue with him here? But here's the problem. Ehrman, and here it is, Ehrman never explains in light of his worldview why humans should try and relieve suffering in other humans.
Yeah. So that's the key here.
Yeah. Why should we do that? I mean, so what, So he makes a forceful case that the God of the Bible is wrong on account of his actions in the face of egregious evil and suffering. But he never explains the basis for his moral outrage.
Right. It's kind of if you're kind of talking in the Western world of things, you should say like all people should have access to healthcare. Yeah. But then you go over to the parts of the world that don't have electricity or running water, and you go, what's healthcare? So who are you talking to? Like I'm sure we could probably come to some type of agreement with that statement. Be kind to people. Try and help other people. Right. But where does that come from? Other than just, I like chocolate. Well, I like chocolate too. That's a good thing.
Yeah. So the issue here is the basis. And this is I think a powerful critique of Ehrman here, right? And of actually all naturalism. And we've seen this before in some of the other books that we've worked through, right? Do they really have a basis? Do they have a foundation that allows for morality? Can you say morality exists in your worldview? Right, that's the issue here that they're bringing out. Right?
Yeah, or is it nothing more than just personal opinion?
That's right. Yeah. That's right.
And so the more Ehrman builds his case in his book against God based on morality, and the more he urges people to help others, the more the problems surface. Right. Where is he getting his morality from?
Exactly.
Who decides what is right and wrong? And that's the ultimate question when it comes down to it. You say that there's evil in the world. You've drawn a circle around what you believe are evil. You've drawn a circle around what's good. Who's drawing those circles? Where are you getting that delineation from?
Yeah, these are moral claims, right? Where are you getting these moral claims from?
Yeah.
Right?
So if I said something like, well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you, I'm going to put you down on a table, I'm going to knock you out, I'm going to take a very sharp knife, I'm going to cut you open, and I'm going to just remove parts of your body. And then I'm going to close you back up. And you'll be actually way better than what you were. What do you know? I'm a surgeon, and I've just explained to you what something is bad, but also I'm doing something good for you. So would that ultimately be good? Right. Or is that evil? Yeah. If I do it without your consent, but I still make you good in the end, is that evil or is that good? We need some sort of standard by which to say, here's the scale of what we're measuring against, and we're putting our piece on one side and seeing if it turns out good.
And Ehrman, it doesn't seem like, gives us a standard in terms of the foundation for it. Right.
He almost
he does. It's his.
That seems to be where he's going. Yeah. So there's various kind of theories we can come up with of where Ehrman might be drawing stuff from. And you might want to say that this is maybe straw manning an argument, but without an argument to give, we're kind of giving a shotgun approach of saying, if you were to say this is what we could say. And so that's what we're going to do here. So if Ehrman says that it's up to a given society to determine its morality.
Okay, right? Well, that answers it. How do we know what's right and wrong? How do we know what's good and bad? Well, it's the society that determines it.
Follow the law or follow the normal conventions.
I mean, that's why we have society, is to tell us what is morally right and morally wrong.
Right. We don't wear pants on our head. That's right. Evil. And then
so if your society says this is moral, then that's what you do. If it says this is immoral, then that's what you do. do.
Yeah.
All right, problem solved. Move on. Next.
Right. And like any good philosophy, we always have to bring up the Nazis or, the Soviets. I always like to bring up the Soviets because Stalin bad and more. And it seems, though, that if we were to follow this, then Nazi Germany decided it was right to kill millions of Jews, or when a society, and again, they codified into law what society found acceptable, that Jews were inhuman people, that they needed to be purged from the societal gene pool makeup and along with other people. So they decided it was right for the abuse of women, to kill babies with disabilities, to protect the gene pool. Then these things are right. So society...
They're the morally right thing to do, right?
Right.
Kill Jews because that's what the society determined was the morally right
society,
thing to do.
and then codified into law.
So we could call this the Nazi objection.
Right. And so, you have these groups of people. There's no higher court of appeals because they're the representations of society. Society has voted them in, and then, they did their thing with dictatorship and whatnot.
Right. So think about that. Where do you get your standard of morality from? Well, it comes from society. Okay, well, what if you lived in Nazi Germany and society said all these things?
Yeah.
Kill Jews, get rid of babies who have disabilities, that sort of thing.
Right.
Is that really the morally right thing to do just because society says it is?
Right. And if you want to say, ew, that's icky, and, obviously we don't want to do what the Nazi says, right? But you can look at the early 30s or even in some parts of the world today where we look at things like the eugenics program, and that was kind of a
1930s,
right? The 1930s.
Yeah.
H.G. Wells and his group of high society, highfalutin people that believed that they were the standard, and then they would codify things that were subhuman, and you would do chemical castrations for criminals because criminality has to be internally genally present, and so by removing these hardened criminals from society, or you have phrenology, you're measuring head lengths and saying, oh, if you have this certain bump on your head, then you're predisposed evolutionary to criminality, and so obviously we have to remove you from the gene pool. I don't know why we should remove criminality, because criminality helps us struggle, and struggle is good within evolutionary framework. Or today, we have certain Eastern European or Western society telling people to abort babies with certain disabilities to take them out of the running for, spreading that gene to other people, and having people like Down syndrome come in. And so,
right. And so do we really want society to be the standard, to tell us what the morally right thing to do is, right? I mean, do we really want to go there, right? So if society doesn't decide, then what is good and evil? Who decides what's good and evil? I mean, if it's not society, then who is it, right?
If it's Nazi society, right.
So perhaps Ehrman might reply, they suggest something like this, that the right or wrong is whatever is most helpful for the majority of the human race. There you go. So whatever is most helpful for that's right.
Yeah.
The greatest consequences for the greatest, for greatest good for the greatest number. Yeah. What is most helpful for the majority? Here's the problem, though. Why should one who believes that this world is all that we have care about the race as a whole, right? I mean, so what? This action might be helpful to the majority of the people. Why should I care about that?
Yeah.
Right? I mean, if this world is all we have, quite frankly, I should be trying to get as much as I can so that I can be as comfortable as I can and not worry about anybody else.
Right. Because, again, remember what Ehrman's saying, this life is all that we have.
Yeah.
Why? Yeah, I don't care about all of society or the world as a whole of other people. What people do in China shouldn't affect me.
Or at least, why should I care?
Yeah, right. There's no should.
I mean, I may, but why should I? You know, if there's no God, we live in a strictly materialistic and, evolving universe, right? Violence and suffering are just part of the natural world. I mean, that's just part of the deal, right? Mm-hmm. There's no inherent morality attached to them. An action is just an action is just an action, right? The leopard kills the antelope, and, we don't say, that
All right,
evil leopard, right?
You're under arrest.
You're under arrest. We're taking you to jail. No. It's just that's the way things are, right? So in the case of violence, it wouldn't be evil. It would simply be part of the evolutionary process, right? And next time the antelope has to run faster,
right?
Right? Evolves in such a way that it runs faster. But an action is just an action is just an action. If this is an evolving universe and violence and suffering are part of the deal.
Right. I mean, this was, Thanos from the Avengers. We struggle, and the universe is too populated. So, snap of the fingers removes half the people, and yes, there'll be a struggle, but that struggle will be good for you, and the evolutionary process will kick in more, and then you're struggling, but you're not competing for as many resources as you once were. So, was Thanos right in his determination of snapping his fingers? Well, only if you're the other half of the people, or you cared about anybody in that half, or, all these things. Yeah, but again, what if that movie made anything clear is that Thanos was a true believer. He believed what he was doing was correct, was right.
Yeah. He believed he was doing the best for the human race, or for all races,
for everybody. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. That's why he goes and afterwards and farms and sits down with a clear conscience, because that's what he believed. And so
So who gets to decide what's the most helpful for the majority of the race?
Right.
Thanos in that case, right?
Well, yeah, he's got the power.
Yeah. So might makes right.
Might makes right. Yeah. I mean, and then we get into problems with the majority. Well, what about the minority? Do we do something that 51% of the population will benefit from while hurting the 49%, or can we not hurt anybody? Would we be able to help anybody at that point in time? Yeah. So. There are many different philosophical and economic beliefs behind this. Hans Hermann Hoppe, Democracy, the God That Fails, talks about kind of the limitations of what a democracy has. And the first part of his book, he compares to a democracy to actually being limited in scope of helping people and economically prosperous from a monarchy. It's really interesting book. I'd definitely pick it up. So what's the kind of the response to this, right? So, by what standard? Who's to say? Well, it's all well and good that Bart Ehrman's talking about, helping people, respect other people, try to do what's right. We would agree with this, right? Yeah. And I would think that most people would have this type of understanding, but it's in spite of themselves that they believe this. What is the standard? What is the ultimate standard? Well, those who believe in God argue that we should care because God created us to care and commanded that we love others. Right. That's part of it. We're all image bearers of God. When we encounter somebody, we should have that understanding. And in fact, we do have that understanding. That's why you have these types of moral systems spring up in spite of evolutionary process. Struggle, survival of the fittest.
Exactly.
But someone who's down on their luck, don't kick the dirt over their grave. Help them up out of the pit.
Exactly.
Oh, well, why? That's taking resources away from me. That person clearly didn't survive in the environment that they were put into. Good luck next time. Hope your family had more kids. Maybe.
So the point here is that as believers, people, we recognize, since God has created everyone and created them in His image, they have value, they have worth, and therefore we should care for each individual, right? However, and God also has commanded us to love everybody.
Right. I mean, that's a big part of the Christian worldview in that. But without God, compassion for others is nothing but kind of chemical changes in the brain. I do it because it makes me happy. Poof, there goes my epidural, the thing that makes me feel good, and I get warm fuzzies. Okay, is that worth it for the survival of the human race? I'm not sure. But suffering is meaningless. Violence is meaningless. All is meaningless
without God.
Without God.
Yeah. Boy, is that true. Yeah. So without God, Ehrman has no grounding for his morality, no basis for his morality. He can act moral, right? He can desire moral outcomes, but there's no basis for it in his worldview, right? And what's more, if he responds to the question, who decides what's right and wrong, with, well, right is what is most helpful to the human race, this only leads to something akin to the initial question, right? After all, as we said earlier, right? What is most helpful for the human race? Well, Hitler and a whole list of others would disagree with Ehrman on what is best for the human race, right? Mm-hmm. And so, who's to decide, right? So there's no grounding here. There's no standard. Where does the standard come from, right?
So we're, again, back to the question of who decides what is right or wrong. That's kind of what we talked about. Apparently, at least in this world, Ehrman himself gets to decide what is right or wrong. Ultimately, he's the standard and decides that God's got the problem.
Well, okay. So he becomes the standard.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I'm sure many people who have this type of non-theistic understanding come to this conclusion is ultimately we have to come to a internal realization of how best to do it. But where do you go from there? Yeah. Do I get people together as a collective and impose my will upon others because I know what's right and best for society? Do you do that in other things like economics or moving culture? Should you do that, or should you let culture just evolve kind of without a kind of higher monkey brain of trying to manipulate it? Or do you have people that try even to do that? Well, that's been kind of the struggle of Western society since, its foundation. But Ehrman has never told us where he gets this notion of right or wrong. Regardless of whether God has a problem, one thing is clear: Bart Ehrman has a problem. Without God, Ehrman has no legitimate or sufficient basis for his morality.
And that's a problem.
Right. Yeah. You might not think it's a problem, but ultimately what it comes down to is standards. And so that's what we're going to be covering here is kind of his four claims then for where he's coming from.
Right. So that gets us to the first claim, right? And it is a contradiction to say that God is sovereign and God is good in view of all the evil in the world. So classically, this is known as the problem of evil. Right? Yeah. How can a good God allow for evil in the world, right? Especially if he is sovereign, right? And that sort of thing.
So in the past, this argument has been frequently made. Books have been written, counter books have been written, counter books have been written, counter book. Pretty much you can go back to, humanity has dealt with this question from whatever beginning that you come to understand. You have to kind of look at this world and go, okay, why did Ugg get killed by the saber-toothed tiger? Or why did the tower fall upon these people? Are they worse off than me? Is there something that designed them? In the comic explosion of the universe, was this always predestined to fall so that we had to make certain choices that only appear to be choices, but they're not really, that it's determined, and that tower fell because it was from the moment of the Big Bang to the heat death of the universe, that's what was designed to happen. There's no way to avoid it. Okay, well, we have to come to this understanding, and so it's been talked about, and so it seems odd here that Ehrman is using a platform where he's the textual critic, the critiquing of Jesus, the critiquing of the Bible, to kind of make this philosophical point. It's an odd step where, we agree you're a good scholar, but why should we listen to you in this respect?
And your philosophical, meandering.
Yeah. However, most philosophers, both religious and secular, now realize that while there is a mystery in the relationship between God and evil, no internal dilemma threatens the rationality of the belief in God. So we kind of looked at this when it came to keeping faith in the age of reason with Jason Lyle. And so sometimes when people say there's a contradiction, well, they don't actually mean a contradiction. They just mean I don't agree with it, or here's an objection to it. Well, okay, you can come up with objections, but it doesn't mean that there's by saying A, you're also saying not A. There isn't that contradiction, that philosophical understanding of what a contradiction is.
Right. And so that's part of the issue here, right? Mm-hmm. The argument against God's sovereignty and goodness in the face of all evil in the world is self-contradictory. Right. So you're claiming it's a contradiction, but actually it's a self-contradiction. It assumes an absolute moral framework that is inconsistent with a worldview in which God is absent. So it's self-defeating, right? There's an absolute standard. Where does the standard come from? Well, it comes from God. Well, God doesn't exist, so you don't have an absolute standard. So we have an absolute standard that's not an absolute standard. Right. That's a contradiction, right? So an argument from the existence of evil to non-existence of God depends on establishing first that suffering indeed is evil.
Right.
You got to establish that first. But this is not an empirical observation. I just don't look at the kids, dip the cat's tail in gasoline and then strike a match to it, right? And say, evil, evil, evil. No, all I see is the cat's tail being dipped into the gasoline,
right,
and a match being set to it. Right. The evil is a moral judgment. It's not an empirical observation, right? So suffering, by the way, under this worldview is natural. For it to be evil, a moral framework has to be presupposed. Right. We have to bring morality into the particular action. Right.
Maybe evolution will guide cats into not having tails to be lit on fire. And this cat just didn't survive that survival process.
That's an ugly. But I just saw your cat. So
I'd be okay with lighting his tail on fire sometimes. So I think what this thing tries to do as well is it tries to start out as an internal critique, but sadly moves to an external critique right away. And so if you're going to internally critique something, you want to be kind of adopting of that worldview for the sake of the argument.
And consistently keep that worldview.
Right. And so this one, it tries, but it ultimately fails by going outside of the bounds of the internal critique. So depends on establishing the suffering is indeed evil, but this is an empirical observation. It's a moral judgment. So you're kind of assuming what you're arguing. You're begging the question in this sense here. And then we come to the second one. Well, it assumes, for lack of a better word, a God's eye view. The problem is that
we can see, down on everything else that's happening, right? Kind of thing. Yeah.
Right. So this is clearly suffering. This person is cutting this person open.
Yeah.
Was that person a serial killer or is it a surgeon? Hold on, let me go find out. Yeah. So the problem is that no human has this God's eye view. It can't look at everything. It can't say, well, this was suffering and evil. Child dies of cancer, but then the father goes on to invent the cure for cancer. Well, is that suffering good? Maybe. I mean, it prevented less suffering in the end. So isn't that what we're trying to do? Presenting less
who knows,
suffering?
Right? I mean,
What standard are we okay with killing the kid if it gets a cure for cancer?
Yeah.
Kids die all the time. People die all the time.
Yeah.
What's it matter about a kid or not a kid? Would it change if we had 2 kids? How about 3? How about 5? Ehrman says he can't think of a satisfying reason suffering exists, so there must not be a good reason. Thus, there must not be a God. But just because Ehrman, or any other person for that matter, can't understand why God would allow suffering doesn't mean that God doesn't exist.
Right.
This kind of incredulity of, well, I can't think of a good reason. Well,
so therefore God doesn't exist.
Yeah,
right?
and so, well, what if I come up with that reason? Well, I don't like that reason. Okay, well, then it's just personal taste. But if there are reasons offered biblically, and we see that there are, Romans 9 especially is a big one that I tend to point to, it provides understanding of why there's suffering, why there's evil, and people have written about this. And so to just say, well, there aren't good reasons. Well, okay, explain why. Talk about these things, and then do it from consistently a standard that we can point to that say, okay, well, it seems like all these things are lining up perfectly. It's consistent within itself. The Christian worldview would say that it would falter, and you can't have a consistent worldview, that you have to assume a God, or by saying that there is a standard, it ultimately points to God as that standard. And so we kind of have to have more of the meat than the bone,
Yeah. So Ehrman seems to agree with the biblical authors that suffering is something that, we cannot fully understand, but then makes the giant leap to say that if he cannot understand it, then there must not be an explanation.
Yeah, lack of imagination. That's right. All I say.
And of course, this is poor logic. One argument simply doesn't follow from the other. Just because I don't understand it doesn't mean that there is no explanation.
Right.
Yeah, and so that's not a good argument.
And so we kind of close up here with our first objection by saying, for these 2 reasons, most philosophers, even those who who claim to be atheists, who are atheists, agree that suffering in the world is not a convincing argument against the belief in the existence of God. And surprisingly, in his book on the subject, Ehrman never addresses either of these 2 reasons, which tend to be the kind of the main reasons.
Yeah.
Okay, that seems odd. Within the scope of literature, if you're kind of responding to things and not just writing off the cuff like an article, you may not do a full-on research. But if you're writing a book, you kind of owe it to yourself a little bit to
Especially
at least
if you're critiquing a position, you want to know the responses to your critique so that you can respond to them. Right.
I know God exists. I don't know why anyone would say God doesn't exist. I can't even come up with a good reason why God wouldn't exist. Therefore, God exists. Would we be okay with that? Yeah. With that understanding? Probably not. Yeah. There'd probably be a few articles written against that type of thinking. So the irony here is striking. In the book titled God's Problem, Ehrman doesn't interact with the major problems set against his own position.
Right. It seems He's the one that has the problem.
It seems like it. It's Dawkins, God is not great. Here's all the bad things religion does. Okay, can you define what great is first? Can we talk about that? No understanding. Just, Jews and Muslims don't like pigs. Pigs offer us a lot of medical benefits. Therefore, because you don't touch pigs, means you're killing people and if you the world adopted this understanding, you are killing more people.
Right, because you can't use pigs to experiment on. And so therefore people are going to die.
Yeah.
Killing people when you don't like pigs.
Yeah. Okay, why? Good, bad, not good? Is killing? Isn't death a part of how evolution drives bad things out and good things in? Okay, well, no pigs for us then, right? Except for the bacon.
So I think we've reached the end of at least this first class.
Yeah, we only got through one. We'll try and cover the remaining three. Maybe we'll do 2 and 3, and 4 will be a big one. We're not sure, but thank you again for being with us for our books. Even if you don't agree with us, we appreciate you watching and driving up our numbers that way. It's been interesting to see what we did it in a coffee shop. We put it out in the net, and we found some friends along the way. And so if you want to support us, patreon.com/Cave of the Cross. If not, continue to watch. That's great. Like, share, subscribe, all the things that the YouTubers who are way better at this than us say to do things, bells, buttons, all that stuff.
That's right. If is this helpful, if you find this helpful, then you share it, like it, and that will be helpful.
Yeah. And I will say, we had an author, I believe, episode 17, Scott Christensen. He has just come up with a new book. He hasn't sponsored us in this, but I bought my book early. What About Evil? So hopefully he's going to do a What About series, because he did What About Free Will. This one's What About Evil? And so thick book right there. So if you're having more reading time and you want to learn about, what are the problems of evil? A lot of people are saying a lot of good things, and so
he takes a deep dive in this particular book.
So all the links for the books that we talked about will be in the description below. And again, thanks for continuing to watch and joining us over coffee, your coffee, not our coffee, in our little book club. So thank you.
See you next time.